Before we start, I just want to say thank you to all the channels that upload the slow motion footage that I use for these analyses videos. The links to everything you're watching here, including the video that's playing now, are in the description. Check those channels out because they make analyses like this possible. So we're going to start with Ben Shelton's serve because I believe he has the best mechanics on the ATP Tour right now, and literally everything I want to talk about is present in Shelton's serve. As we get to the rest of the players, what we're going to do is focus on one or two mechanics with each of their motions and kind of discuss how they implement it and how that might relate to your game and your serve. But for Shelton, because his serve is so perfect, we're just going to kind of shotgun through an overview of everything that makes a serve great. And then after you watch the Shelton overview, if there's like a particular mechanic you want to see more about or a particular player you want to see what they do on their serve, you can just check the timestamps in the video below and just skip to that. But first, we just want to get an overview of where we're going with all this, and we're going to use Shelton to do that. So let's start with the power position, and let's explain why this power position is so good. Now, the purpose of the power position is to prepare the body for this initial forward explosion. And in order to do that, you've got to master a couple things. The first is coiling. And when we say coiling, what we mean is stretching the off shoulder against the hitting side hip. So in the back, that is stretched. This hip is stretched, and the soft tissue behind this shoulder is stretched. That shoulder and that hip are going to fire. They're going to pull together in the back, and that's going to send the right side forward through the hitting zone. You're going to see the off shoulder disappear. That off shoulder is getting pulled back, and you're going to see the hip pop forward. So the hip is also contracting. That whole line on that side, this whole diagonal of the abdominal X here, that whole thing stretches, contracts, stretches, contracts, stretches, contracts. So that's number one, why this power position is so good, is that coil. Number two, let's look at the right side now. That elbow, down and back. Elbow and shoulder, down and back. Elbow and shoulder, down and back. So what we have here, we have the opposite. Here, we're stretched in the back. Here, we're stretched in the front. So the stretch happens here. This elbow and shoulder gets down and back as far as we can get it. And then because it's stretched down and back like that, during the forward swing, that stretch, and it unwinds, and then the shoulder shoots up and forward because it was stretched down and back during prep. I want to talk about the spine, and because Shelton's shirtless here, we can really see it. So this early coil position, see that backward side bend. Now, not everyone can do this, and we're going to get to servers later who don't use this, but if anatomically you feel comfortable, this kind of backward side bending action where the shoulders here are tilted back more than the hips, that is going to help you, again, because during the forward swing, that's going to unwind. So by tilting the upper part of the thorax back and then having that unwind through contact, you get more upward acceleration. And then the other thing I want you to notice is this thoracic extension we get here. So see how the spine is curved back? The top of the spine is curved back here. Again, not every player can do this, but Shelton can. That's why we're demoing with him. And this is also going to unwind. What we're doing with this thoracic extension is using all the springy soft tissue in the trunk to, again, load and fire, load and fire. So we're here, and then as we load, that spring loads the back, and then boom. You'll notice now the spine is basically straight. The thorax is basically totally neutral again. The flexion and extension of the spine, and we say the spine, but really we mean, you can see it because he's got his shirt off. Really we mean all of this soft tissue. The muscles, the fascia, the tendons, the ligaments, the entire soft tissue complex that runs throughout your trunk stretches, gets spring-loaded in your prep and early drive phase. And what you're seeing here is all of those springs that you just loaded up unloading through the trunk. And to close out the Shelton overview, I want to talk about arm slot. And what I mean by arm slot is how vertical is this angle when you hit the ball? Guys use all sorts of different angles here. The thing that I want to mention, though, is that arm slot, absolute arm slot with respect to the ground, is not as important as keeping your arm in the same plane of rotation as your shoulder. So watch Shelton's elbow and his shoulders here. See that? See how the shoulders drive the rotation? The elbow, this line here never gets too far out of plane with this line of the shoulder. Maybe it's slightly above here, but slightly above, slightly below is fine. In general, if you keep your arm in line with your shoulders, everything is going to work a lot more effortlessly. So if you want to raise your contact point, Ben Shelton has a really high slot here, which is great. That gives you a great geometrical advantage. The way he does that is look at the shoulder over shoulder action. The off shoulder is very low, the hitting shoulder is very high, and if we look at this angle here, that angle is very similar to the angle of the arm. That's why this works so efficiently with a high slot. If Shelton's shoulders were level, but the arm was up in this slot, then the serve wouldn't work very well. How does he get into this position? Because of this. This natural bend here is going to unwind you naturally into that cartwheel position, and it's because this shoulder starts way above this shoulder, it's going to be very, very natural. That unwinds, and the shoulders switch, and now you can hit this high arm slot while keeping the arm in line with the shoulders. So that's the Shelton overview. For the rest of the serves, we're not going to go through every single thing. We're going to talk about the unique things with those players' serves and which things you want to look for when comparing that player to your own serve and your own game. So speaking of perfect serves, we've got Pete Sampras here. And with Pete specifically, we can really learn about external and internal shoulder rotation. So before we get to that, I want to just go to the power position, and I want to show the quick checkpoints that match up to what we looked at with Shelton. He's got this backward side bend here, and what that's doing is it's getting these shoulder over shoulder here. He's got a cartwheel so that this shoulder is over this shoulder during the forward swing. And when you prep like this, it naturally stretches the body so that this shoulder wants to be above this shoulder at contact. The second thing he does, which is a little different from Shelton, is he stretches this off shoulder farther across his body. Now what matters is stretching this shoulder against this hip. So what Shelton does is he pulls this hip back. So he's got a bigger angle at this hip, pulling this hip way back. Sampras instead stretches this shoulder way across this way. And that's just personal preference. As long as you're getting a stretch through this diagonal, you're good. You can get that stretch using the off shoulder. You can get that stretch using the hip. The shoulder needs to be stretched against the hip. Okay, so let's watch Sampras go to contact. Boom. So similar to Shelton, we see some thoracic extension here. And see how we actually have some thoracic flexion here? So Pete really engages, spring loads the thoracic spine with extension and flexion to help increase velocity. But look at this famous elbow position. Now, a lot of people overrate the role of forearm rotation, pronation and supination, specifically pronation, on the serve. It is not that important. If you pronate, great. If you don't pronate, it's not that big of a deal. What I want you to notice with Pistol Pete, the shoulder drives serve velocity. So the motion is driven from the trunk. The trunk is connected to the shoulder. As he loads the trunk, spring loads the trunk, as he accelerates up into what we call the kind of cocking phase here, this max velocity, this externally rotated shoulder right here is being stretched. The shoulder and the rotator cuff and all of this springy soft tissue, similar to the tissue in the trunk, it's not as strong, but this tissue is being stretched backwards into external rotation. And because of that stretch, that happens. Boom. Because it was stretched backwards, it internally rotates forcibly, reactively through the hitting zone. Shoulder rotation is what drives serve velocity. Now he pronates a little, but that's not that important. The forearm, yes, the forearm stretch contracts too, the wrist stretch contracts too. The shoulder and the trunk are what drive the serve. The shoulder and the trunk. So the trunk creates the velocity, and the shoulder externally, internally stretch reacts. And with Pete, we have that super famous high elbow finish, which really demonstrates just how much, and stretch, contract, just how much that shoulder rotation contributes to serve velocity. So with Andy Roddick, we kind of have the epitome, the final form of this idea of stretching the left shoulder against the hip. With Roddick, specifically by stretching that left shoulder. This is probably the highest degree of stretch on this left shoulder blade that you're going to see. This is this shoulder stretched against that hip. The other thing I want to point out with this particular position is you twist down and back. So you can also use this left shoulder and this left arm for leverage to pull that side of your body backwards to twist your right side down and back. So part of the way you get this shoulder slant and prep, you can side bend at the spine, and you can just twist down and back, and you'll also get into this position. So we've got this stretched against this. We've got elbow space. The shoulder, it's neutral right now. It's about to fly into external rotation. And just like with all the great servers, this shoulder pulls out, this hip pops, that line in the back is contracting, and this is also contracting in the front, yanking this shoulder side forward. We've got max external rotation here, and internal rotation through contact. The last thing I want to talk about with Roddick, which is the same as the previous guys we've seen, all these extremely high velo efficiency guys are going to have good spinal mobility. There's no way to hit a serve at 150 miles an hour without good spinal mobility because you have to spring load the thoracic spine like this. And again, when I say the thoracic spine, I mean this soft tissue complex here. It's harder to see from this angle. He's stretched. The thoracic spine is stretched back into extension during this cocking phase, and then that stretch is going to unwind through the contact to really fire that side forward. So watch the back, extension, boom, and even a little bit of flexion. See that? We even have a little bit of thoracic flexion in the follow through here because that's how spring-loaded back and front, that's how spring-loaded this part of the trunk was during that serve. Similar high elbow finish to Pete because high-velocity serves are all trunk shoulder rotation driven. So with Roger Federer, we're getting into different ways to create this coiling stretch in the power position that leads to explosion during the cocking phase. What Roger Federer does, you'll notice he hasn't taken this left shoulder blade and yanked it all the way back here. Instead, he uses something we call hip-shoulder separation, where his hips are facing the side, and his shoulders, his chest, this upper part of his trunk, is facing us. It's facing the camera. We can see the Nike logo on his shirt. So he has used a slightly different plane of spinal motion. He has twisted his body. He's twisted the trunk against the hips in order to create that stretch back here on this part of the X. And that is a perfectly fine way to do it. It's also a very elegant, pretty looking way to do it. And I think, ironically enough, Federer looking so good serving with this technique has actually created a lot of issues for players trying to learn the serve. Because I've both seen on the internet and worked personally with players who copy Federer's serve because it looks good, but there are tons of ways to use your spine, tons of ways to use your shoulder, tons of ways to use your hip to get this coiled stretched position. And you should only be using Federer's if your body, your mobility, and one other thing we're about to talk about are the same as Federer's. And if you want to copy a pro, really we should be doing it from first principles with how it feels. But if you want to copy a pro, you have to find a pro whose body is sufficiently similar to yours. One of those similarities needs to be eye dominance. Roughly speaking, every person has a dominant eye and a non-dominant eye. Your dominant eye is the eye that processes information better. I've written a full article called The Secrets of the Eye. I'll link that below so you can read all the details. I'm not going to go into all the details now, but here's the important thing. Roger Federer's dominant eye is his left eye. That is the eye that is towards the court. When you are serving, you must be able to see the service box and your opponent in your peripheral vision. So you toss the ball. You have to follow the ball with your foveal vision. Foveal vision, that's what you keep in focus. You have to keep the ball in focus. You can't look down here with your focus, but you must be able to see down here with your peripheral vision. If you can't see the service box, your aim is going to be way, way worse. And if you can't see your opponent, you're never going to know when they cheat on your serve. Andy Roddick actually talked about this in a podcast. He used to very often swing this way to try to get an inside-out forehand on Federer's second serve. And on reaction, Federer would yank the ball down the tee and ace him with the second serve because when Federer is about to swing at the ball, his left eye can see all of this in peripheral vision, and Federer is left eye dominant. Now, I actually suspect Federer may be like Justin Jefferson, wide receiver for the Vikings, where he's both eyes dominant. Almost every single human being has a dominant eye and a non-dominant eye. There are rare freaks of nature who can see just as well out of both eyes, so they basically get two dominant eyes. I think that might be Federer. But if that is the case, regardless, his left eye is a dominant eye. And so he can see everything going on here, and the reason he can aim, well, one of the reasons he can aim so well at the corners of the service box is because he can see the corners of the service box when he winds up. And players who are right eye dominant copy Federer's serve. They're using this eye. They have no peripheral awareness of what's going on here at all, and they can't aim, and the serve will forever feel awkward. Sometimes their body actually makes lower body compensations and they hurt themselves trying to compensate to be able to see. But most of the time they just serve blind and the serve is just never that accurate and their opponents can cheat however they want because you're totally blind. So the upshot here, you cannot copy a player's loading phase if you have the opposite eye dominance that they have, because it will not work. You won't be able to see the court and see your opponent the way they can. Federer is cross-dextral. There is a roughly 2/3 chance you are pure-dextral, and so you are not going to be able to serve like this. The right eye dominant serves we're going to look at next, they're not quite as aesthetically pleasing because it's just not as good. It is an objective disadvantage to be pure-dextral on serve. Being cross-dextral on serve is objectively better. Being pure-dextral is better for things like the backhand return. It's trade-offs. Everyone has their own strengths and weaknesses. Everyone has different spinal mobility, shoulder mobility, and different ocular dominance. So let's look at a textbook right eye dominant serve. This is a pure-dextral player. Holger Rune is right-handed and right eye dominant. And what you're going to immediately notice is in the prep phase, the chest, the torso is not facing the camera, it's facing the side. You cannot coil by twisting the torso back the way you can if you're left eye dominant if this back eye needs that peripheral sight line to the service box. So what are you going to see in pretty much all good right eye dominant servers? You are going to see this angle at the hip because we can't take this left side and stretch it across as much, so we get a nice stretch by having that nice stretched position at the hip. We are still going to fire from here. We're still going to fire from here. Another thing I want to point out with these right eye dominant servers is this falling away, that falling to the left action. You see this falling to the left. See how Holger Rune is falling to the left? That is not a flaw, that is a feature. When you are right eye dominant, you just need to keep everything facing forward more. But in order to power your serve, you must rotate. And so the only way to meet both of those criteria is to allow yourself to fall off to the left and rotate. Now, it's not really bad on the do side. On the ad side, you leave the line open, but it is what it is. You have to play around your ocular dominance, your body, and so you can't coil back by twisting as far, although you can still get a good stretch in that diagonal by getting a nice flexion at the hip. You have to keep your eyes and your head and your chest and your torso, everything more forward. And so in order to twist into your serve, because you have to power the serve with rotation, you're going to have to fall off to your left. You just have to do it. Last thing I want to point out is this is just a great mechanical serve in all the other ways that we talked about. Great loading position, like great ready to coil, great elbow space. This has been tucked back, so we've got a nice stretch here. And then as we fire, we see all the same we see nice, really nice spinal, maybe even lumbar flexion. So the spine is really spring-loaded here. The trunk is really spring-loaded. The shoulders back into external rotation. Max external rotation here. And a nice natural, I believe this is the second serve, but a nice natural follow-through. You know, the shoulder will externally internally rotate on every kind of serve, first or second. We still see that off shoulder disappear as that pulls towards the back hip. We still see the back hip pop. So great mechanically sound serve, adjusted for right eye dominance, and Holger Rune is a phenomenal height adjusted server. Okay, so now statistically the best right eye dominant server in the world. Now Alexander Zverev is 6'6", so obviously that helps. But again, I want you to notice we've got nice hip flexion here. Even though the chest is facing sideways, we can't turn it back to the backcourt. This back eye has that peripheral sight line. Even though we have that, we still have a nice stretch between the hip and the shoulder, and as he fires, you're still going to see the shoulder pull out. So see that off shoulder disappear, and that hip pops. So even if you're right eye dominant, you still must stretch the hip against the shoulder, and it must contract in the back like this to power your motion as you drive in. We can already see here, by the way, even he's just started his motion, and his head is already pretty forward. That back eye has a pretty good peripheral line to the other side of the court. And if you've never felt this, if you're a right eye dominant player and you've never felt this, you've got to try serving more forward. All of a sudden, your accuracy is going to go way up. And another player with very good spinal mobility. Anyway, let's look at some of their other mechanics. If we look back here, we've got this nice extension through the thoracic spine, spring loading the trunk here, which is going to create a lot of extra velocity through the contact zone. Uses his shoulder the same way. Phenomenal shoulder over shoulder action so that he can have this high slot, and his arm is only a little bit out of plane with his shoulders. Again, if these shoulders are level and the arm's up here, you lose a ton of velocity. The more you can keep the arm in plane, the better. And so the more diagonal you can get the shoulders, the more you can get a high arm slot while keeping the arm in plane. This, by the way, is really up to you if you like leaning back during your prep like this. You don't have to lean back during your prep like this in order to hit this nice thoracic extension here. You can just start straight up and still hit this thoracic extension position. So a lot of people feel more comfortable. They feel like they get into that thoracic extended position in the cocking phase better if they lean back during the start, but that's just up to you whether you feel more comfortable like that or whether you feel more comfortable straight up. Now, Mensik uses my favorite technique for the right eye dominant server, which is what I call the Pure-Dextral pinpoint. And I want you to look at the way he does this pinpoint. So watch the back foot. He steps onto the right, the hitting side of his off foot. So it's almost like an open stance serve. And what this lets you do is now he's stretching his trunk in a similar way that Federer is. But Federer's foot is back here. So for Federer to do that, the torso has to be facing way back. But because Mensik's feet are facing forward, he can stretch this shoulder against his hips without having to turn so far back in an absolute sense. Look at this hat. Look at the angle of the hat. That back eye can see the court and periphery. So see how forward his head is. Even though he's wound up this left shoulder, he's stretching against his hips. It's literally kind of an open stance serve. And in my opinion, this is the most effective way to serve as a right eye dominant player, with this kind of pinpoint where you put this foot on the hitting side. This is how Greek Sport does it. This is how Watnuki does it. Watnuki's 5'11", he hits 25 aces a match doing this. So it's gonna feel a little weird at first, but especially if you're already serving pinpoint. If you're already serving platform, maybe don't change. But if you're already serving pinpoint and you're right eye dominant, try this pinpoint because you're gonna be able to coil your shoulder against your hip a lot more without having to turn so far away from the court so you can still see. Everything else is what we've talked about. You know, Mensik, he's got pretty good spinal mobility. He's got a phenomenal shoulder. That off shoulder pulls out like it always does. The hip pops like it always does. Shoulder externally rotates like it always does. One thing I want to point out with Mensik, this is a phenomenal arm slot. Like, this is almost perfectly in line. This actually isn't as extreme as some of the other guys with his slant, but again, the taller you are, the less you need to slant your shoulders low to high. This is just a great anatomical way to hit the serve here. A lot of people take this and they're too far up in here. Keep it out ahead of you, and if you want to get it higher, get this shoulder down more. But this, if you're going to copy an anatomical position, copy this shoulders, arm, racket orientation through contact. Again, we see him falling to the left because you kind of need to fall to the left. Again, on the do side, it doesn't matter. On the ad side, it's bad, but you kind of have to fall to the left in order to serve like this. But, you know, Mensik has one of the most effective service games on the tour. I want to go over a few unique things with Novak Djokovic. First, I want you to watch the racket during this early part of prep. So watch the racket right here, and watch how it kind of flips him naturally into his external rotation using momentum. See that? So see how he likes to have the racket here, and then as he flips it up, the momentum just naturally leads into external rotation. And this is something that some guys feel much more comfortable with than just starting here with no momentum. Now, you can start here with no momentum and then just flick the racket back into external rotation whenever you want. It's totally fine. Lots of guys do that. Andy Roddick and Ben Shelton, they load into this position and then they fire the racket back. But a lot of people love this momentum. See how the momentum of the racket just naturally leads right here. So here's the early part of prep, and that racket flipping up just naturally leads the arm into its external rotation. Some people, that rhythm there is really critical to feeling the serve. Another thing I want to talk about with Novak Djokovic is I want you to watch his elbow. Does not fully straighten here. Stays bent pretty much the entire time. This, you lose such a tiny amount of power, but you completely protect your elbow against hyperextension. So don't think that your arm has to straighten out. You can serve. Serving is about internal shoulder rotation. Your shoulder can rotate if your elbow is bent. So the elbow does not need to straighten out. Next, I want to talk about his off arm. So watch his off arm after the toss here. So he gets, by pulling that arm up and back, he gets that nice stretch on the front side of the trunk here. Now, why is this stretch on the front side of the trunk important? Because as we're going to see, he does a very extreme shoulder over shoulder action so he can get a high arm slot. So because the trunk is stretched now, the front of the trunk, that front side is naturally going to contract. And because of that, we have this when this side of the trunk contracts, that it yanks this shoulder down, this shoulder goes up, and now you can have this high arm slot, high contact, while having your shoulder in line with your arm. These have to be in the same plane of rotation to make the serve maximally comfortable, maximally efficient. And so you pull that off arm, get a stretch here in preparation. This will contract during the serve, and you'll be able to get this high arm slot naturally. With Nick Kyrgios, I want to point out that the legs are overrated on the serve. So we're actually going to play this full speed first. So what these are, they're relatively casual warm-up serves, except they're really, really, really fast. And the reason they're really, really, really fast is that the serve, it's an upper body dominant motion. Yes, the legs add 10-20%, and if your upper body mechanics are already perfect, then the legs are where you go. But most of the people watching this, your upper body mechanics are far from perfect, and you are going to get much bigger bang for your buck by working on your upper body than you are by trying to use your legs, because if your trunk's not working efficiently, the power from your legs is not going to get into your arm anyway. This loading position is, in my opinion, optimal. Now, you don't have to prep all the way down here, but the more you can internally rotate your shoulder during prep, the more length it has, the more distance as it whips back into external rotation, so you can get more momentum into external rotation, a better stretch at the shoulder. So when you load with the palm down, with the forearm down, with the racket down like this, you have such a long way to go here, and so your racket can really, really accelerate back, spring off your rotator cuff, and then fire through the ball. We also see this arm is on the hitting side of his body because he's getting that stretch in the back here, where this part of the trunk is stretching that way against the back hip. We're going to see this arm pull out. We're going to see this roll back. We're going to see some flexion. We're going to see some flexion. The thoracic extension is a little hard to see, but we're going to see the flexion at the end so we know what happened. So if we watch this motion, see we have some thoracic flexion there. We've got the contraction in the back of the trunk. We've got the shoulder whipping back into external rotation. And see how the jersey is kind of curved here? See, so the fact that his thoracic spine is in flexion here, we know it went through an extension flexion spring. It's a little hard to see with the jersey, but because it's flush against his back here, we can see it's in flexion here, which means we know it was extended, and then it sprung into flexion, so he gets power from the spine there. The last thing I want to point out with Kyrgios is he has a perfect arm slot. So if we watch this serve, this arm is pretty much absolutely perfectly in line with the shoulders. And this being in line is one of the reasons that his throwing motion works so effectively. A lot of guys are a little bit above plane. Nick Kyrgios is absolutely perfect. This is almost literally just a throw, but in this diagonal upward plane of rotation, striking through a ball there with the racket. And again, that serve was probably like 125. And when he serves, when he serves as hard as he can with his legs, it's 140. So I'm not saying the legs do nothing, but they are very overrated. With Carlos Alcaraz, I first want to talk about his coiling, and then I want to talk about the contact point. So first, the coiling. So watch the hip and watch the off arm. So this is kind of a Roddick level coiling of the upper back, stretching the shoulder against the hip. He's got flexion at the hip, and he's pulled this arm across and back, across and back. So he's getting a stretch in the front of the trunk here. He's getting a stretch in the back of the shoulder here. And this is the Andy Roddick where everything twists and stretches back and down as much as you can. And again, when I say that the elbow is up away from the body still, we're talking about the trunk and the shoulder stretching. And then as we go into contact here, you're going to see that front shoulder disappear as always. You're going to see the hip pop as always as those pull together and drive the right side forward. So I want to talk about contact point. Carlos Alcaraz has this kind of Roddick style pause here where he preps and cocks everything. So from this point, watch the shoulder, watch the hand. See how the hand starts going back here? From this point, your contact point can't really be changed. Like, you can kind of throw your trunk in different places, but what we really want here is, as we're doing this early backwards action of the arm, you want to have internalized exactly what this entire thing is going to feel like. So you're here, you're looking at the ball, looking at the ball, looking at the ball, and as you start this, boom, you're already swinging at the ball mentally. When you go like this with your arm, you're already swinging it at the ball because you've memorized for your body what happens when your shoulder stretch releases like this. Because if you're here and now you have to make an adjustment, you have to do it awkwardly. You can't, like, the rotator cuff is stretched here. The way that the serve works so efficiently is the rotator cuff is stretched here and it releases that stretch through contact. That's how you serve, which means that when you're here and when you're looking at the ball preparing to hit it, you need to have an internalization of, I throw my racket, throw the hand in the air, and throw the hand, and throw the hand. And if you're trying to put mental inputs here, you're trying to put mental inputs into your serve in this part of the serve, chances are you're not actually getting a great stretch here because you really shouldn't be able to put inputs into your serve here because you've already committed, everything's stretching and everything should just fire. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, where do we throw the hand? Towards the center of the other service box. So watch the hand. See where the hand is being thrown? See how the hand is being thrown towards the ad side service box? And then internal shoulder rotation will cause the racket to send the ball to your left. When we're here, we already have this contact point in mind, and we know we're going to throw the hand to the opposite service box and let internal rotation hit the ball sideways. So we've talked a lot about thoracic extension. With Jannik Sinner, I want to work on one of the cues that I find helps people really get there, and it's to throw your chest to the sky. Here's kind of coming into the end of preparation. This is Jannik Sinner's chest. Let's say you were to pitch your racket. If you were to like throw your racket like a baseball forward, this chest is probably going to go to the net. You're going to twist this towards the net. Because we're serving, which is an upward throwing action, your chest goes to the sky. So if we watch the motion here until the cocking phase, we see that. We see the chest action, see the chest throwing up to the sky. The rhythm here is you cock for the throw and you fire up to the sky. Cock and throw, cock and throw, cock and throw. Jannik Sinner, we see just like Novak, he likes to use momentum. Watch the hand, watch the racket. He likes to use momentum to naturally guide that racket into its external rotation. We also see he likes to pull the hitting shoulder across the body, which is a great way to get that stretch in the back when the shoulder is on the hitting side of the body. And then we take the chest and we throw it to the sky. A lot of people, when they throw, they just don't really have an internalization of getting that throwing motion to be an upward throwing motion. Lots of throws are forward throwing motions. Pitching is actually a downward throwing motion because you start on the mound. The serve is an upward throw. So take your chest, throw it to the sky. When you rotate, you're not twisting forward, you're twisting diagonally up and forward. And then just like with almost every good server, if you watch where the hand is thrown to, it's thrown to the middle of the opposite service box. So we're serving to the deuce side here. Right here, you have that mapped out in your head. You know how you want to strike the ball as you're looking at it. You explode up to it in an upward throwing motion where the chest spins to the sky, and that hand follows through into the other service box, and internal shoulder rotation slaps the ball where you're aiming. So with Daniil Medvedev, let's talk about spinal mobility. You're going to watch the serve here, and you're going to notice a stark lack of thoracic extension, which you see in most of the other guys here. And you see how the spine is mostly neutral here in the follow-through because the spine is only flexed in the follow-through when it extends and spring loads through extension through here. We also don't see a whole lot of backwards side bending. We got a little bit of a bend, but a lot of guys are really capable of jutting this hip out and really loading, tilting back this way. And Daniil Medvedev appears to not really be capable of that either. Now, I am guessing that this is not technical, that it's not that no coach has ever told Daniil Medvedev that he wants to throw his chest to the sky and use thoracic extension. I'm guessing he just can't do it. And, you know, everyone has to work within their limitations. You might look at Daniil Medvedev and be like, he's 6'6", why are his serving numbers so bad, you know, for the ATP standard? But you got to remember, being 6'6", that's one advantage, one geometrical advantage you have. But there's a lot of properties to a body other than height. There's your eye dominance. Being left eye dominant or being cross-dextral is an advantage. And there's spinal mobility. If Daniil Medvedev were 6'2", but with phenomenal spinal mobility, that would be actually a better anatomical advantage than being 6'6" with very limited ability for spinal flexion. So everyone has to play within their strengths and weaknesses. He's still a great tennis player. He works around it, and he's got a decent ATP serve given his limitations. We'll go to another view here, and we'll look at some of the other parts of his serve, and you're going to see they're all very similar to what we're looking at with the other guys. The only real difference is the lack of spinal mobility throughout the thorax, through especially this cocking phase. So here's the back view, and just like a lot of our really good right-eye dominant servers, Daniil Medvedev uses that Pure-Dextral pinpoint. See how that back foot lands almost in an open stance on the hitting side of the off foot, and that allows you to coil that shoulder. Look at the shoulder here, coiled against the hip. It's on the hitting side of the body, pulled this way. We got the load phase. We've got the 90-90 preparation, 90 degrees here, 90 degrees here. That preps the elbow to fire. Again, the cocking phase, we have very limited thoracic extension, very limited spinal mobility here, but we still see the shoulder pull against the hip. And we have very limited internal rotation through the hitting zone. And that's a little concerning. With most guys, you see the racket end up on the right side of their hand. Medvedev just kind of goes forward because he's not getting a whole lot of rotation at the shoulder. That could just be because of the limited spinal mobility and the limited stretch at the shoulder, but that maybe could be fixed. Maybe you could try throwing from a little bit of a lower slot. I'm a little bit surprised that the shoulder doesn't look better, even without the extra velocity from the spine. But, it is what it is. It's still, it's still an ATP quality serve, although given his height, obviously you'd like it to be better. So next, let's watch Alex de Minaur. And I know he doesn't get a lot of credit for his serve. I want to go over some of the things I think he does well, and some of the things which I think either he does poorly, but more likely are physical limitations that he has to work with. So this is a first serve here, and statistically, we're going to get to his second serve. His second serve stats are statistically some of the best in the world. Now, we know he's good off the ground, but that means his second serve is at least starting neutral points for him, which is much more than you can say about most guys' second serve. So his second serve is objectively good. So anything you think about de Minaur's serve, you have to contend with the fact that his second serve is objectively good. So most of where I think he goes wrong are things that are unique to the first serve, but let's just look. Pure-Dextral pinpoint, just like most guys that are right-eye dominant, they bring that foot onto the hitting side of the body, comes up here, fires through. We're not getting a whole lot of spinal extension. If we look, this actually looks pretty similar to Daniil Medvedev here, where the spine is not really extending here. We don't really have that much spring loading through the spine. We do get a little bit of a lumbar extension and flexion, which helps spring load a little bit of that soft tissue. And I want to watch the way the shoulder is coming through contact. We're not really throwing the racket as far to the right, or throwing the hand as far to the right as would be optimal, and the shoulder rotation isn't happening quite as much as would be optimal either. It looks like he may have a little bit less external shoulder rotation mobility than some of the other guys. I'm not sure if this is a physical thing or a technical thing. Another thing, though, is I don't think that throwing from an arm slot that's this high is really optimal on the first serve. I know he's only 6 feet tall, but even if you're 5'10", 5'9", I think you want to throw from a more horizontal arm slot on the first serve. This kind of gives you this kind of up and down sort of action and saps a little bit of that rotational power. We're going to move into the second serve here, and we're going to see that high arm slot is amazing for the second serve, because on the second serve, you really want that vertical action as the racket snaps through contact. And so I think that maybe if Alex de Minaur would throw from a little bit of a lower slot on his first serve, he could kind of have the best of both worlds, where he still has this phenomenal second serve, but he's able to get a little bit more on the first serve. But you never know. Every player is working with their own limitations. Last thing is the spinal action, the spinal mobility, it actually looks a little better on the second serve. Like, we look like we're getting a little bit more lumbar and thoracic extension here. So it is possible that the first serve is bad because of a technical issue, not because of a physical limitation. That's possible. And, he's a great player. I'm sure some people have tried to work on his serve with him, so I'm not sure why it looks that way. But this second serve is one of the best in the world. It keeps the points neutral, and then he's able to play his tennis behind it. Almost everything that we look at with de Minaur, we've got the Pure-Dextral pinpoint, we've got the same coiling position, we've got the same cocking position, a little bit limited spinal mobility, although it does look like we have more thoracic extension on the second serve. Similar, the shoulder and the rotation comes through very similarly here. He might not have quite as good external rotation as some of the other guys, but it's still quality ATP serve. I want to go through Matteo Berrettini's serve, a phenomenal server, and sum up kind of everything we've talked about so far. So first, again, Pure-Dextral pinpoint. Watch that back foot. It's really coming on the hitting side. He's really committed to this open stance. This lets you really wind the shoulder against the hip while keeping that chest more forward. Look at the left arm. It's on the hitting side of the body, so we're stretching that shoulder. And as we cock the racket here, 90-90 preparation. 90 at the elbow, 90 at the upper arm. This 90-90 angle right here is going to give you the best anatomical position to throw that shoulder forward. Again, I want to stress that you don't need to bend back. You can bend back if you want to during prep, but even if you're straight up here, that's totally fine. You can still get into that nice chest to the sky position as you throw. Now coming into the cocking phase, we actually see kind of limited thoracic extension, but we have good lumbar extension from Matteo Berrettini, so we still get to spring load the trunk. That off shoulder is going to disappear down, pull towards the hip pops, and watch where that hand is thrown to. It's thrown to the center of the ad side service box. It's thrown off to the right of the target, and then the internal shoulder rotation slaps that ball left for a right-handed player towards the target. And lastly, let's just look at Berrettini's arm slot here. So he's got a nice high arm slot, nice geometric advantage over the net, and the upper arm is almost perfectly in plane with the shoulder line. So shoulder line, upper arm, maybe slightly above plane, but he gets plenty of velocity. Great shoulder rotation, even with being slightly above plane. Every guy is not going to have the exact same geometry through this part of your body. You're going to have your shoulder insert be slightly different. The angle of these, connections be slightly different. So the goal for your arm slot is maximum comfort, maximum velocity. And we know Berrettini serves ridiculously hard, so I'm guessing this is the perfect arm slot for his anatomy. And then as we follow through, we often fall off to the left. Don't worry about that, especially if you're right-eye dominant. Twist, focus on serve, racket head velocity, serve effectiveness. If you have to fall to your left, just do your best to recover, which is actually what we're going to talk about next. We're going to close by talking about Alexa's serve. And the first thing I want to talk about is simplifying your preparation, and then we're going to talk about getting ready after you serve, which is so important, and it is part of the serve. Alexa's preparation is one that you can copy if you're struggling with the early rhythm. Just take your arm, put it back in the 90-90 position. Very simple, just place it there. You don't need to momentum your way in if that doesn't feel natural to you. You can literally just get into this position and then throw from here. Second, I want to look at Alexa's arm slot. Alexa grew up throwing, and so this arm slot right here, this kind of a lower arm slot, this is what you see in players who are very natural throwers. Perfectly in line with the shoulders, often a little bit of a lower arm slot because it makes more sense on the first serve to use a little bit of a lower arm slot. You have this really great, biomechanically efficient position for your shoulder to whip through. We also see great thoracic extension on Alexa's serve. She has great spinal mobility, so right here, we see that nice rounded back that the chest is facing the sky, and then we come through. Now, this is the part of the serve that often gets neglected, and we have to work with kids on this a lot because you practice your serve from a basket a lot, and you forget that there. Land, ready. Land, ready, and then when you get something like this, like a floater, notice 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hops. So we don't have to be super anxious. We don't have to hop a million times here, but we are keeping the feet moving as we track the ball through the air. This is all part of the serve. Now, you can practice your mechanics, you can practice the serve itself, but at some point you need to connect the serve to the act of receiving the first ball. And this, where you finish, you land, you get wide, you split, and then you react and you track and receive that first ball, that has to be seamlessly integrated into the service process if you want to hold serve. If you want to just serve out of a basket and hit targets, you don't have to do that. But if you actually want to hold your serve, cock the racket. You have to get that nice stretch, get that thoracic extension, fire that shoulder through in a natural arm slot, and then receive the next ball. And if you can do that, you can hit a high-quality first ball, and you're going to win a lot of your service games.